Hi, my name is Brandon, and I'm an alcoholic and addict in recovery, and today I'm going to talk about Step 4. Step 4 is a big one. It's where a lot of people get stuck in the program, and I want to start off by reading some of what Tommy Rosen has to say about it in Recovery 2.0. Step 4, in Step 4 we made a searching and fearless inventory of ourselves. And what he says is to have resentment is to feel negativity towards something or someone else over and over again. It's as if our mind is in a groove playing a really bad song again and again. In the big book, resentment is referred to as the number one offender. It destroys more alcoholics than anything else. That's a big statement, but it is time tested. Think about how you feel when you're caught in resentment. It actually hurts. So pausing there for a second. In my addiction, I lived a life filled with resentment. I could not go more than 30 minutes in the morning without finding fault in something someone else or something else was doing. I felt like the rest of the world was doing things that were either harming me or an inconvenience to me. It made even the commute to work was hell because I constantly found people on the road who deigned to do things that inconvenienced me. And so all around me, I could see people causing problems in my life, and I built resentments from morning until night. So reading more of what Tommy says, he says, in my opinion, the 12-step method of looking back to understand and analyze our lives is genius. Rather than just write a history of our life detailing where we missed the mark, the authors of the 12 steps instruct us to look back at our lives through the lens of resentment. We write down our resentments toward people, places, and things. Whom have we resented? What caused that resentment? What aspect of our lives did this affect? And most importantly, what was our side of the street in the resentment? This process is laid out in great detail in the big book and is one of the most transformative things I've ever done. So I agree completely with that. Step 4 and completing Step 4 was the beginning of, if I had to classify it, it felt like the beginning of the second phase of my recovery. I got clean, I got into treatment, and I had about 3 months of sobriety when I really dug into the 4th step, and probably actually a little bit less than that. But when I really got into it, it had probably been between 2 and 3 months. And looking back at these resentments was one thing, and it was a little bit of a difficult task writing down all the resentments I had. But then looking at where the part I played in those resentments was eye-opening, because there were certain situations where I felt like the world or people in it had done me wrong, and there was nothing I had done. Wrong had been done to me, and I played no part in it. And after careful analyzation and after really looking at it, it started to become clear that in every single one of these situations, something I had done maybe not contributed to the actual action, but contributed to my resentment. But in most cases, even when I felt someone had wronged me, there was something I had done in the past that set that up. And so it was a really important process for me to go through, and to go through with a sponsor. You have to go through, just like all the steps, you have to go through this with a sponsor to get the most out of it and to truly understand it. So reading more from the book, Tommy says on page 62 of the big book, it states, sometimes they hurt us seemingly without provocation, but we invariably find that at some time in the past, we made decisions based on self, which later placed us in the position to be hurt. From the first time I read that until the present moment, I'm struck by the importance and clarity of the communication. Some part of me is always involved in my resentments. Seeing this clearly has been humbling, but also empowering. It's humbling to look at my own shortcomings in situations where I believe others have acted wrongly. They may, in fact, have behaved poorly, but if I blame others since I have no control over them, I have no power to be in the solution. So that's super important, because a lot of times it feels like, especially in very traumatic situations, I'm thinking things like, child molestation. I'm thinking things like traumatic abuse. It's very difficult to want to look at that and say, well, what was my part in it? Because it's hard to imagine playing the victim playing a part in that. And so those kind of situations you really have to work through with a sponsor, because it's not a clear cut thing in those situations. Sometimes it's looking at how you handled things after the fact, and how you handled things, even 20 years on, that you have to look at. But in a lot of other situations, you can look at these resentments that you have and start to see, man, I did something out of self that put me in this situation. That whether it was something that I didn't say that I should have, or someone that I should have talked to, that I got upset because so and so didn't call me on my birthday, but it turns out I really hadn't been reaching out to them much anyway, just to see how they were doing. Those kinds of things that we carry with us throughout our days. We've got to take a look at what was my part in this. And so one of the important results that comes with that is, as we start to go through resentments, we start to see a pattern of, well, the reasons that I the reasons that I did these things, the roots of these resentments seem to be based in these patterns of behavior that look like fear. And so Tommy goes on to say, after we've written down all of our resentments and examined them, we take a look at the way fear has played a part in our lives. We will come to see that our resentments are connected with fear. Usually resentments have a lot more to do with fear than we realize. So we make a fear list and put them all down in black and white. For most of us, this is a long list. Here are some of the big ones. Fear of being alone, fear of economic insecurity, fear of not being enough, fear of ridicule, fear of commitment, fear of authority figures, fear of failure, fear of success, fear of responsibility, and fear of rejection. So what we notice is that our disconnected lives, which have been run on self-will, have been dominated by fears of all kinds. These fears caused us to act and react in ways that brought us pain and suffering. And once you start to see all of the ways that fear have dictated the behaviors that have caused your resentments, then you realize that it's actually you who needs to make changes. It's not the rest of the world. It's me that needs to change. And as soon as you get that realization, there is a sense of freedom unlike anything that I've ever experienced. Because when the rest of the world is what needs to change, that creates a prison for the mind and for the person. When you truly believe that the rest of the world needs to change in order for you to be secure, in order for you to not feel fear, then you're creating a prison that you can't escape from, because you can't control or change the rest of the world yourself. So all you're doing is hoping for the world to change. And most of the stuff that you're getting upset with other people or places or things about are not going to change. That's the way the world is, the way it's been for years. It's not going to change. But you can change yourself. And once you start to realize that, and start to realize that fear and addressing fear is at the base of that change, then you feel a freedom. And for me, it was an amazing moment when I started to understand that if I just took a closer look at the fears that I had and then started taking action every day to try to overcome those fears, then I had a chance of living a life without resentment, where I could avoid developing resentments and then where I could address them as soon as they came up. It's one of the, going through step 4 is one of the most powerful things that I've ever done in my life. It's one of those things in the steps that I feel like everybody should do. Not just alcoholics and addicts, but everybody in the world should go through this, and so that they can see the same kind of things that we get to see. And when I got done with step 4, I felt like I understood myself, my past, better than I ever had, and I also had a clearer picture of the way that I needed to conduct myself in the future to avoid falling into the same trap again and again and again. That's it for today. I'll be back tomorrow with more. Have a good one.